Purpose of the slides, as I want to go through them, is to highlight, as Adrian says, the current financial position of our diocese and what actions have had to be taken or are planning to be taken to improve our financial sustainability. We shall be looking at both income and expenditure of our diocese and the levels of reserves that are held specifically by the Diocesan Board of Finance. Looking at the income of our diocese, it is important to remember that we operate through mutual support, and the majority of our income is allocated to the common fund, which is then used to meet the expenditure of our diocese. If our diocesan income declines, our common fund is reduced, which means we are less able to sustain ongoing levels of expenditure. This is not an issue that is just purely for the Bath and Wells diocese. This is an issue that is affecting pretty much every single diocese in the country. A recent presentation in terms of the deficits or planned deficits for all dioceses across the country is probably eye-watering, to say that in terms of across the diocese, we are all anticipating making significant deficits. So we are all experiencing the same issues of rising costs and static or reducing income. So when I look at income, our diocesan income comes from two key sources. Firstly, funds that come from directly from PCCs. This is predominantly parish share contributions, but also includes parochial fees. And secondly, there are funds generated from Diocesan Board of Finance assets. This includes investment income, rental income, and grant income. The graph on the screen shows the makeup of our diocesan income from 2019 through to what was happening in 2021, our current budget for 2023, and projections to 2026. The red line on the graph represents the level of income that was received from PCCs in 2019. And the green line represents total income that is received into the common fund, including investment income, but importantly excluding capital gains, so that's selling of our assets or use of reserves. The target, clearly, for every charity or every organisation is to ensure that income generated matches our expenditure. If this does not occur, as has been the case since 2019, there is a requirement to bridge the gap between income and expenditure from alternative sources. In our case, this has included selling assets, which has created capital gains, or the use of our unrestricted reserves. Of course, it is important to note that these assets and reserves can only be used once. In 2021, you will note that the total of capital gains and reserves is the £2 million figure that is highlighted on the screen. And this is fundamentally our shortfall between our income, ongoing income, and our ongoing expenditure in that year. It is anticipated that capital gains and selling of capital assets are going to be required to be needed until 2026 in order to match our income to expenditure or expenditure to income. The goal clearly is to return our income to the financial, income to the financial position of 2019. That is in the fact that we're not relying on capital gains or reserves utilizations. And you will note that in 2026, the red line of the income from PCCs is back into the position where the PCC income hits that red line, with investments and related income making up the rest of our income. Although the plan is that our income will match our expenditure in 2026, we are currently seeking to identify the best ways to address the long-term implications that the current cost of living crisis, the ongoing war in Ukraine, energy bills, what the government might say tomorrow, etc., will all impact on what 2026 will look like. If I just focus on parish share and that line, it is clearly anticipated that parish share will not be able to keep pace with inflation in the next few years. Inflation, I think today was said it was 11.1%, if not a bit more. We are not in a position to think that our churches and our PCCs are going to be able to sustain an 11.1% increase in their contributions. This is clearly as a result of a number of factors that we've all been talking about, cost of living increases, etc., and combined with the fact that our worshiping communities are diminishing and aging. The graph on this page, however, is showing what the parish share collection would be if we had inflated the 2019 receipt by inflation, or the CPI figure, till 2026, and estimates to 2026. And the difference at the end to what we're currently budgeting or forecasting to what would have been if we'd matched inflation is over £3 million. It may not look it on that graph, but there is a £3 million difference at the end. Of course, most of our expenditure will still increase in line with inflation. So as a diocese, this is, in real terms, actually a drop in income. So in real terms, a drop in income. So that's talking about income, but how it contributes to the common fund. But how is it spent? This graph looks a bit like the edge of an earth, and in terms of, think of it, the crust of the earth and the sides of. But it's fundamentally the first graph, but with, instead of columns, you've got it in an earth format. So each part of it represents parts of expenditure incurred by the diocese. The graph here shows the expenditure in its broad headings. The coloured bands illustrate these levels of spending, as well as the two income lines that I spoke about before. So the black line is the income from PCCs, and the red line is the total income before capital gains. This graph shows that in 2019, the income that we were able to obtain and receive from PCCs, actually in terms of expenditure covered in its entirety the stipendiary related costs, their housing costs, and the training costs. A position we are seeking to return to. If you look at it in 2026, we are seeking to return to the fact that the PCC contributions cover our stipendiary related costs, housing costs, and training costs. The remaining costs that are above that line are all incurred as we work towards our vision of living and telling the story of Jesus. However, having said that, it is not straightforward to state that the income from PCCs only covers stipendiary related costs. And I want to make it clear that if PCC income drops, it does not mean that we have to just drop the stipendiary costs, the housing costs, and the training costs. We have to make a drop across all areas. And that is what we have done and what we are doing. So it's not, I don't want you to take away from this to say, well, PCC's contributions cover exactly stipendiary ministry, but we are seeking to make sure that the PCC costs do cover that level of our costs. The next slide I'm going to go on to is talking about what reserves we have as the Diocesan Board of Finance, and we clearly have had to take action relatively swiftly, as our ability to ride out the storm is being greatly eroded over the last 2 years. We have utilised already significant levels of our reserves and made capital investment gains in the past 24 months to support the ongoing deficit. Whilst our balance sheet may appear strong, having a value in excess of 100 million in assets, the majority of the balance sheet is unfortunately not available to support our ongoing financial challenges. The slide shows that we have a relatively small amount of restricted funds that are funds for specific purposes, and the majority of our funds are held in endowed funds, which support the investment income that our diocese is able to obtain, but the majority of it is tied up and unable to be used. And in addition to that, a large proportion of our unrestricted reserves are currently allocated or tied into resources that aren't immediately realisable. For example, it might be in fixed assets, or it might be in back-to-back loans, or the Pioneer project work we are currently undertaking. So in real terms, we only had at the end of 2021 £3.5 million of unrestricted general reserves, which is less than 2 months worth of expenditure cover, and it's shrinking as we speak. Therefore, it is clear that we cannot continue on our path as it currently stands without making further changes. So what does our proposed path or a change actually look like? Firstly, I want to say that actually everything that is done by parishes is the most critical part of any path of recovery. So it is an important part, and everything you are doing to stimulate our church communities, wherever you are, is playing an important part of the recovery of our diocese. What we have been able to do, and I'll go through some numbers here, we have been able to increase the amount of investment income we are able to obtain. We are able to include Glebe portfolio income, which is allowing us to get approximately 430,000 additional income per year to support the Common Fund. We have undertaken a reshaping of diocesan support staff, which not only reduces the cost per annum by around about 320,000 per year, but it has also been done to seek to ensure that we maintain and increase our focus on supporting parishes and supporting ministry and mission on the ground. As well as reducing support staff costs, we are unfortunately having to undertake a reduction in stipendiary posts, and this is both in incumbents and curates. Partly as a result of doing this, but also in identifying some surplus housing stock that we hold, we are reducing the number of houses owned by the diocese, which is reducing our ongoing maintenance commitment, as well as providing financial resources in the short term. For the next couple of years, we are proposing being able to take an additional amount of drawdown from our endowed funds. We do need to note, however, that it is anticipated that this is highly likely to erode our endowed funds unless by some chance returns can be achieved in excess of 5%. But at this stage, we're not anticipating it. But all of these actions are either seeking to maintain or increase our income or reduce our costs. But our final continued path of action is to maintain our focus from pre-pandemic on growing the kingdom and our church communities, which we aim to achieve through enabling the growth of a range of ministries and releasing the gifts of all our people. This will be a challenge if we are unable to do so from a solid base. We therefore have undertaken a number of these measures in order to buy us time and to enable us to have resilience or increased resilience across the diocese. So speaking of resilience and income resilience, we can support PCC income resilience in a number of ways. And I would encourage you to look at all resources that are currently available, both on the National Church website and our own. And I would support and encourage you to speak to any member of the DBF support team in terms of Gary Watson and the funding advisors have been referenced here, but it is anybody within the diocesan support team are here to support you. But some areas that you could look at are planned giving reviews, community giving strategies. We've spoken a lot already in this group about giving tools and contactless giving, and in respect to legacies. So obviously there is the potentially, when you're looking at aging congregations, legacies could be a really critical part of a conversation. As mentioned also in the chat of are we in the parish giving scheme, Adrian said we are in the process of trialling and therefore launching hopefully the implementation of the parish giving scheme. This is a platform for individuals to donate to PCCs. It is enabling giving to be accessed by all without needing to give out necessarily PCC bank details. Importantly, it can act to improve PCC cash flow. As one of the main advantages it has is it takes the administrative responsibility of claiming gift aid on behalf of the PCCs and paying it on a monthly basis. Inflationary increases can be proposed by the donor and accepted by them, which could make conversations of inflationary increases more straightforward for parishes in the future. The cost of the scheme will be borne by the Common Fund with no individual PCC transaction fee for joining. That having said, there is a cost, but it won't be applied to each parish. So with all these actions we have discussed, we all identify that income is not going to match inflationary increases for 2023. So this is why our collective actions have had to be undertaken to address our financial position. And doing so allows us to request a below inflation increase to parish share contributions to 2023. Hopefully everybody can understand from this presentation that the ability to be able to offer a reduction or a static position with all of the other costs that were alluded to going up would have been an extreme challenge that wouldn't have been able to achieve without making a number of additional reductions. Across the diocese, we will continue to signpost each other to grants and other sources of funding and support available to PCCs to counter the cost of living crisis. And you should all have received an email from myself. It wasn't spam. It may have looked like spam, but trust me, it wasn't spam, from myself saying that the National Church is distributing some funds. I know it will be little in terms of the whole grand scheme of things, but I won't try and use the Tesco every little helps, because that's quite derogatory, but it will go towards some of the increases of energy costs, and we will be distributing that across all of the parishes in due course. But I want to thank every one of you on the call for all you are doing to support our diocese, and we appreciate the challenges we are all facing. If we continue to believe in our cause, we will be in a stronger position to bring others with us on our journey, or on their journey. Thank you, Adrian. I'm happy. The floor is open for questions now, I believe, Adrian.